Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view, in that order of importance to myself. And today I'm looking at the Avengers from the 1980s, from November 1980 to December 1984. I'm going to be looking at issues 201 to 250. Now, I call this the Copper Age. Some people say it's the end part of the Bronze Age, but for simplicity's sake, I say the Silver Age is the 60s, the Bronze the 70s, and the Copper is the 80s. So this is the first half of the Copper. As I say, 201 to 250. So what's it about? Well, Earth's mightiest heroes, they band together to defeat a foe that no single hero can defeat. That's the whole premise behind the Avengers. So I'm going to go through the run. I'm not going to show every book, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the storylines and some of the key issues and some of the highs and maybe one or two of the lows as well. And it's basically divided into two sections. There's the first half of the first 25 and then the second half. And I say this because the first half is a mix of writers and artists. It's primarily written by Jim Shooter as of issue number 211 to about 225. But in between, there's David Michelini writes a story. I think James DeMatteis writes another one, or that might be that's later on that he writes one. But there's no steady team, creative team working on the Avengers. Not only is the writing changed, but the art changes as well. First couple of issues are by George Perez, and then there's one by Carmen Infantino. You get some Gene Colan material in here, as well as Bob Hall. So we start off with issue 201, and this is actually like two separate stories in a sense. The first half is just the Avengers after the events of issue 200, are just sort of lounging around at home deciding what to do next. I think it's interesting that Iron Man and Cap are discussing Ms. Marvel's situation, and they both sort of say, well, I'll be happy when I can forget her and put it behind me. That just seemed like an odd thing to say. And included in that first half is about 3 to 4 pages that sort of sets up the next issue. It's one of the few times that there's actually a foreshadowing and a plot thread going on here. The second half is just a short story about Jarvis on his day off, and actually that's a pretty good story. I like that story. And as I said, you get some George Perez artwork on just the first couple of issues. So the lead up was to a conflict with Ultron. Now, Ultron's a pretty important villain to the Avengers, and he warrants more than a one-shot issue, which is pretty much what this story is. The plan isn't clever from Ultron's point of view, or creative. It's just, again, sort of like, I want to take over the world type of thing. And in one issue, the Avengers defeat him and encase him. I think it's in a sheet of adamantium. And what's really strange is that they just leave him there in this abandoned factory. They say, "Oh well, he's not going to go anywhere." This is Ultron we're talking about, and it just seems like so throwaway for a villain that is so powerful and has overcome so many things that you just sort of leave him there. I didn't understand that. We get to issue number 203, and this is the one that's illustrated by Carmen Infantino. Now, the reason I'm going to talk about this one is I want to show you a couple of panels in here. Okay, so you see those central panels that are running down, the sort of pink and red version of the Beast and Wonder Man, and then the one below it of the blue version of the Beast and Wonder Man. It looks like it's got a filter on it of some kind. There's a filter being in place here. And these images go throughout the book itself. It's not just limited to this one. Question is, like, whose vision is that? Like, so the story is basically, the Beast and Wonder Man are out on the town, and they run into these street thugs, and they run into these crawlers, and the crawlers are friends of a missing kid type of thing. So it's a question of mistaken identity, and they track down the crawlers, and there's a bit of a conflict there. Somebody dies, And then at the end, a warehouse or a building blows up and catches on fire. And Beast and Wonder Man run out to a cop and say, "Look, there's this terrible thing been going on. There's a fire over there." And the cop turns around and says, "I don't see any fire anywhere." And there isn't. It's like they've been reset to the moment that they got there. Everything looks exactly the same. So, did it really happen? And here's the strange thing is that, is it a hallucination that has been affected both Wonder Man and the Beast? All of the other characters, were they real or were they part of the hallucination? And if it is a hallucination, who's behind it? And what's the reason that they're doing this? Are these crawlers even in existence? And none of this is answered. It's just, that's it. The end of the story. You're left with, well, did it really happen? It poses far more questions than it answers. If the idea was just to see these two guys buddy up and have a combat and how they interact together, could have picked a little bit more standard style villain. I would have gone with that because this one doesn't make any sense. It leaves so many questions that are never answered. One of the other things that I found odd about the very beginning of this run as well is that Jocasta, again, she sort of wanders off one day because she says, "Well, nobody's paying attention to me," and the rest of the team says, "Okay, so she's just out doing her own thing." I'm sorry, she's like a robot android thing. How is she going to be doing her own thing? She doesn't really mix and with the public at large. So having her wander off and then no follow up on that is, again, there's a problem with this, is that there's a number of times throughout this first 25 issue run that there's no follow up to things that there should be a follow up for. Here we have another villain, Yellow Claw, from I believe he's from 1956, and so he could be a clever, cunning villain in the line of Fu Manchu with plans of world domination or whatever. And they run into him for 2 issues. I like this particular cover, but he doesn't. It doesn't pay off that way. He doesn't seem to be clever or cunning, and he's dealt with in just a couple of issues. There are some big gaps in the logic behind things that are being done, and it just seems that it's like a rush, like almost a fill-in issue for a villain that could become could be a very good story, but it's not. It's just like a 2-issue fill-in, and going on from here, there's the Weatherman, the Resurrection Stone, a bunch of fill-in issues before we get to issue number 211 when we're supposed to have the new creative team. So we do get a new creative team supposedly, and it's going to be Jim Shooter and Gene Colan. This is a Gene Colan cover. And the first thing they do is it's a call out to bolster the ranks of the Avengers. So there's a couple of weird things going on here. Like Jim Shooter, he really wants to get a point across. He really, I need to have this thing happen, and I'm going to write it. And I don't care the logic, the sense, and all that. As long as I get this thing to happen, what's the shortest route to get this thing to happen? So in this particular issue, it's Moondragon, and remember her because she comes back very soon. Picks up on some idea that the Avengers are looking for new recruits, and so she decides that she's going to come back to Earth and she's going to mentally summon a whole bunch of characters here to try out for the Avengers, because that's her way of helping the Avengers. So they all show up, and what do they do when they all show up? Well, they throw punches and punch each other in the face, sort of like a trial and error. And I suppose people like to see that. They like to see various characters, battle one another. Eventually Cap says, "Get out of here, Moondragon. We don't need your help. We can do this on our own." And she says, "Fine," and takes off. And the end result is that they do find a new recruit, and they bring Tigra on board. And it's like, okay, why Tigra? Even Cap even in the book itself, he's wondering why Tigra, but they go ahead with it. They know nothing about her. And I'm wondering, from a publisher's point of view, Did she develop a fan base when she was in Marvel Chillers? Actually, had like 5 episodes there in Marvel Chillers, but not enough to sustain the book, but enough that perhaps people who like Tiger would now buy the Avengers because Tiger is part of that. Or was it possible that we want to give her a little bit more exposure because we want to maybe reconsider and relaunch a Tiger title in the future? I don't know, but we'll get to a answer very soon. It's also the beginning of the Hank Pym breakdown storyline. And that's really the storyline that Jim Shooter wants to concentrate on. Everything sort of leads to that situation. And in this very issue here, Hank Pym has got a whole bunch of problems. He's jealous of his wife's, Jenna Van Dyne's, success and her money. He feels inadequate when compared next to Thor and Captain America on the Avengers team. And he's not having much success with his scientific work as well. It's all resulting in a failure. So he's feeling a little bit like a failure, and he's got a huge chip on his shoulder, and that starts in this particular issue. Is it a minor key? I don't know. I mean, you may be able to find this one still in the dollar bins. There's some characters on the cover that do appear. Like, I mean, if you're, for example, like I like to buy Moon Knight material. Well, Moon Knight is featured in this particular issue. So there's a collector aspect to that as well. So we follow that up with this issue here, 212. Okay, again, this is Jim Shooter trying to get to the end, and the end result is he wants to have Hank Pym make an error on the field of battle, and Hank ends up shooting the Elf Queen in the back when she's ready to talk to Captain America in civil tones. So her back is turned. Cap's about to talk to her, and they're sort of having a discussion, and Hank Pym blasts her in the back, and she goes back onto a rampage. So what is the Elf Queen's story? Well, she's some sort of mystical being that's been living in fantasy land for thousands of years, or I think it's about 1,000 years, with her barbarian husband. And one morning, after 1,000 years, the barbarian wakes up and says, you know what, I'm tired of this idyllic life and this farm pasture stuff. I'm a warrior. I need adventure. I didn't need that adventure those last 1,000 years, but I need it today. So he steps beyond the border of whatever fantasy world she has and finds himself in New York. Because why not? And you would think that he would be like, oh my, like really shaken by what he sees in New York, but he's not. I mean, there are times he says, oh, this is a little odd, but he strolls around as if it's not that odd and tries to partake in New York life the way he does as a barbarian. And eventually that does cause some trouble, and then I believe it's a cop that shoots him, and he dies. And this sends the Elf Queen off into a rampage, and she starts, blasting things out. The Avengers are called in. They have to deal with her and subdue her. She's taking on all of the Avengers, and she's holding them to a standstill. It's only when Cap sort of finds a way to communicate with her that he tries to break her down, and she starts to settle down and begin to talk with Cap. That's when Hank Pym shoots her in the back, and she gets, the trickery, and goes off on her tangent again. They mollify her as best they can, and she ends up literally walking off into the sunset. As the conflict is over. But it's just strange that, and then Hank did this thing because he shot her in the back, so he's going to be brought in for a court-martial for doing something wrong on the battlefield. And it's just very strange that, the Elf Queen is this massively powerful being. Perhaps we should call Doctor Strange and find out, where she is from and what's this all about. Perhaps we should try and track her. She's got that much power, and she's in a foreign land type of thing. She may misunderstand more as time goes on. So perhaps we should follow up on this. Nothing, nothing, not at all. The only thing that Cap's interested in when he gets back to the Avengers mansion is to bring up Hank Pym on charges of for a court martial because he screwed up in battle. And I don't even think the screw up's that bad. I bet you if you went back in the 200 issues and you saw one of the Avengers do something wrong or make a mistake in the battlefield, I bet you there is some out there and they're not being called out on it. I mean, he shot her in the back, which is not really a heroic thing to do. But if that was a means of ending the threat, I'm sure if she had been a threat, like a genuine threat, this could have been something. But all it did was irritate her. But nonetheless, that's the point that Jim Shooter wants to get to: is Hank Pym shooting the Elf Queen in the back and then being brought up on charges for a court martial. And this is the beginning of the court martial and a continuation of Hank Pym's spiral down. I highlight this particular issue because this is the issue that has the slap. Now, so up here at the top, you can see that, Hank Pym gives a backhand to his wife, Janet Van Dyne, ends up giving her a black eye. It's not very. It defines his character for the next, I don't know, 2-3 decades. Whenever you're referring to Hank Pym, you're always referring to this slap. It just seems, for everything else that he's done and everything else, this is what he's remembered for. I don't know that if Peter Parker had slapped Mary Jane for whatever reason, that would be his defining moment for decades. I don't think that would be the case. I think he would, Hank Pym does apologize and says, I was under a lot of stress and there's no good reason for it, so I'm making my apologies, making my amends, but it haunts him for decades. Even when Mark Millar wrote the Ultimates and had a chance to change some of the characteristics and the characters around, rather than, not embrace that, he actually doubles down on it and makes Hank Pym more of a brute regarding Janet Van Dyne. So this does it haunts him, for decades to come. When Jim Shooter was asked about it, I don't know if it was something I read or an interview I saw, but he says that was never the intention. The idea was that, while he's flailing his arms around in anger, he mistakenly hits Janet in the face by flailing his arms around. But when the artist got hold of it, he misinterpreted the words and drew the panel. And by the time that the mistake was caught, the panel had already been inked and it was off to the presses, so that we couldn't stop it in time. And I do wonder a little bit about that particular explanation. I mean, there's your panel. What kind of words were you using to describe flails around and mistakenly strikes her in the face that would translate into this? It looks pretty darn deliberate. So either your description was really bad, or I'm not going to call you a liar on that, or it just seems that there's a difference, a miscommunication if that's the case. Although, and did Jim Shooter does lean into that a little bit more, and I don't know if that's because it's now become evident that this was a direct slap, or if that was the intention all along. Don't know. But this is the slap issue 213 that haunts Hank Pym for most of his time. There are some fill-in type of issues. Because it doesn't concentrate strictly on the Hank Pym storyline. I mean, that flows throughout this run from Jim Shooter. But Jim Shooter is now moving a little bit more into the editor-in-chief, and soon he's going to leave this particular run because his concentration is elsewhere. This is sort of a fill-in story. I'm showing it because it's got the Ghost Rider on it, and I think this is like the first time that the Ghost Rider makes an appearance in the Avengers. I might be mistaken because at one point, Hercules and Black Widow, they were a member of the Champions with Ghost Rider, with Angel, which you can see over here. So it's possible that there was a panel or so where Ghost Rider appeared. But this is him on the cover, and it's one of his earlier Avenger appearances. Also, this is the one where Tigra gets very afraid when Ghost Rider instills in her some degree of fear. That comes back. Now, here's Gene Colan doesn't illustrate this one. In fact, his time is almost done illustrating the Avengers. This is by Alan Weiss, and he does this one and the next one. And it wasn't a bad pair of stories. And you get the Silver Surfer showing up, and you get an actual genuine villain who does appear to be villainous, and that's in Molecule Man. The interesting thing with this one here, and it's a two-part story. That's the first part, and then the second part is that Tigra gets very upset and very fearful of the events, and by the end of it, she resigns as an Avenger. So she was really only here for 6 issues. So again, why did we have Tigra involved in the Avengers at all if she was going to be gone after 6 issues? Is it because you want to point out that not everybody is cut out to be an Avenger? I mean, that may have been the idea or the truth back in the 80s, but it certainly isn't now. It's pretty much everybody's an Avenger. And even Tigra herself joins the West Coast Avengers not too long after this. So I'm really not sure why Tigra was brought on board for just these 6 issues. This is I think the J.M. DeMatteis one I was talking about. I'm only showing this one because it's a cover that I don't think would get passed today. Well, it might. I don't know. I mean, in a book that was to be bought in a store, so the kids could see it, etc. The idea of a child pointing a gun at his own head. I don't know that would pass. I mean, the kid's immortal and it just keeps regenerating. This is to prove that point. But somebody not knowing and just seeing this particular image may be a little bit upset by it. I mentioned in keep track of Moondragon because she flit in in issue 211 to mentally send people there. But based on the events that are happening in this 2-issue storyline, she's been elsewhere for months manipulating the population into a sort of a peaceful type of settlement. And beginning her mental conquest of the world. That's, where she's headed with this. Months that she's been doing this. And yet she takes the time out because she got somewhat like a little buzz in her head, says, oh, the Avengers are looking for recruits. Well, that means I better leave here. I better leave this planet that I've got under mental control so that I can go and do this little thing. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a bad pair of stories. Where are we? 221. All right, so 221, we get a new team again. And this one has a little bit of value because it's the first time that She-Hulk joins the Avengers. And some people will collect this one. I was watching a video when somebody picked this up in a dollar bin or a cheapie bin because it had a picture of Rom on the cover. Rom doesn't actually appear in the book, but he's on the cover. And he says, I collect everything Rom. And so there will be some people that will buy this book because it features at least the image of one of the characters that they're collecting. So this is the first time that She-Hulk comes on board. And I'll point out also, well, pretty close to this time is we do follow up on Jocasta, and she apparently died in issue number 93 of Marvel 2-in-1. So she wanders off, we pay no attention to her, and the next we hear about her, she's dead. Not a fitting end for poor Jocasta. I like Jocasta. So this is perhaps the most valuable one in this stretch from 201 to 250, and it's because of the cover. I mean, Taskmaster is showing up, so it's an early appearance of Taskmaster, but this is an iconic cover. And if I'm not big on the whole grading things, but I can see why this particular one might be graded with a sharp whites, clean whites, and the fact that A graded copy, you don't read the interior. You're not interested in what's on the inside. You're only interested on the image on the outside. And this is one of those iconic covers. And it does have some value. If you can find one really cheap, good for you. But it's probably the most valuable one in this particular stretch. And the second most valuable one is this one here, number 227, the second appearance of Monica Rambeau. As she's known as Captain Marvel, I think she goes on to be named Photon. I don't know. Did she change her name again? I don't know. But here she's known as Captain Marvel, and it's her second appearance. I liked this part of the Roger Stern run, because now we're into Roger Stern's run. Because I think he did a good job of developing the character of Captain Marvel, showing us who she is, giving her some background, giving some idea of the powers, the nature of her powers, her personality. She was one of the best things to come out of this Roger Stern run. Roger Stern runs. He probably got a fair amount of direction from Jim Shooter, or worked alongside him, because a lot of what happens in this Avengers run, it all starts to tie in the Marvel Universe. I think every issue has a reference to an existing book that's happening right now. Like, for example, in this one, you see that there's Reed Richards and Sue Storm on the bottom there. There's probably a reference to the Fantastic Four and what issue they're up to, and check out this issue over here. Iron Man is not a part of the Avengers anymore, because he's going through his whole thing with Tony Stark being an alcoholic and James Rhodes taking over the Iron Man armor. But Iron Man, they do visit with Tony Stark and Iron Man. And there's a little notation that says, well, if you want to find out more about what's going on with Iron Man, check out these issues. And there's check out these issues for Thor. And when Spider-Man shows up, check out these issues for Spider-Man. And there's references back to other issues. It's trying to tie in all kinds of elements of the Marvel Universe to make it more cohesive. So Jim Shooter has left by this time, and as I say, Roger Stern's taken over. So Jim Shooter doesn't even finish his Hank Pym storyline. So we leave it up to Roger Stern. I'm not going to tell you exactly how it ends here, but Hank Pym just goes from bad to worse, and this is part of that worst part. And I want to show this one because it's not often you get to see a cover with Egghead on the cover, and Egghead has a role to play. Now, I like the story of Hank Pym. I mean, I don't care for the character of Hank Pym, but his breakdown is a good story, because I've seen other characters, like you've seen Daredevil in Born Again, when he's broken down, and I think there's some other characters that have also experienced that, but a lot of the times that's from outside forces that are manipulating things to cause the character grief. This is his pretty much his own doing. As Egghead just sort of, adds a little bit more at the end to make it even worse, but it really concentrates on the fact that this is Hank Pym as a hero breaking down. And I find that to be an interesting story, and it was the story that Jim Shooter wanted to tell, and so it's told better than some of the other material that I've read by him in this particular run. And eventually we get to the point where, Yellow Jacket he gives it up. He says, "That's it. I'm done here." And it begins his new journey. I know you're going to say that, well, for something that Yellow Jacket is around, but that's always the case, right? Characters come and go, but this is one where he says, "I'm finished." Very minor key here. I don't even like calling it a minor key. It's just because we've already been introduced to Eros, who is now we called Star Fox. I think Janet Van Dyne gives him the name Star Fox because he says, "You're kind of foxy and you come from the stars, Star Fox." There's a couple of bucks on it, and it's a decent cover of him as well. There is some development with Star Fox. It hasn't come to a conclusion by the time we get to issue number 250, but he has this ability to manipulate your pleasure centers, and this bothers some people, and I get it. I mean, most of the mind manipulators out there are are evil or have bad intentions. I'm thinking of the Enchantress, for example. She charms people, and she's got it that way. And the Purple Man is probably the best example of somebody that manipulates somebody to do something against their will. I mean, he just triggers the pleasure principle in your brain, and you're more likely to go along with what he has to say and do what he wants because you're feeling euphoric. Um, Still, it's still a mind manipulation thing, but so there's some talk about that he's not really a hero in some ways. I find that way too. I find that way with Professor X. That guy just, he creeps me out. He bugs me. I won't use my mental powers to look in on your thoughts unless I really need to for whatever reason. Look, I'm walking one day, I'm sitting again. I'm walking, I'm sitting. Oh, I'm dead, I'm alive, I'm dead. I don't trust you at all, Professor X. I'm on to you. Again, with the tie-ins here, this is Annihilus is involved in this, but this is not an Annihilus Avengers type story. The Annihilus story actually happens over in the Fantastic Four, which again, there is a reference code in here that says check out these issues of Fantastic Four for the full story of Annihilus. But there is this barrier thing that they have to pass through. It's illustrated by John Byrne, who's also doing the illustrations and the writing over at Fantastic Four. So it's sort of co-plotted by John Byrne to be part of that. So again, it's the whole idea of trying to bring all of the universe together. And on that front, we get Spider-Man shows up. He swings. He says, "Maybe I can be an Avenger," and tries out for the Avengers yet again. And again, references to what's happening in Spider-Man's life at the same time. Okay, 239. I thought that this might generate more buzz and be worth a little bit more because it features David Letterman, a popular figure of the time, on the cover of a comic book here, but it doesn't seem to have any bearing whatsoever on it. So again, just a little surprised. Spider Woman comes back in issue number 240. And I'm happy about that. Ann Nocenti helped write this one. She was the one that finished off the Spider-Woman story, and they left her sort of in limbo, dead type of thing. But I'm glad that they brought her back because I like this. This is the Jessica Drew version of Spider-Woman. But when she comes back, she apparently loses all of her powers. We know that doesn't stick. But I'm wondering if that's in place because Marvel Superhero Secret Wars is coming up, and we introduced to a new Spider-Woman by the Julia Carpenter becomes the new Spider-Woman, and it makes me wonder because Julia Carpenter's costume looks more Spider-Man like, and her powers with the psychic webs are a little more spider-like. And I wonder if Jim Shooter wasn't happy with the direction of the Spider-Woman book or her development of character and wanted to have something that was more closely related to Spider-Man. I don't know. This is the issue 242 that at the end of this issue, the six of the Avengers go off to go fight Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. This is the one where they find the transportation device and away they go. And I bring up 243. This was the other decent storyline in this Roger Stern line and again, it hasn't come to a complete. It's not complete yet. It involves the Vision becoming sort of like an AI overlord. Interesting, this is 1984, and we're talking about AI today with concerns and what have you. I mean, not to say that this is so radically new. 1984 is also the year of the Terminator, and that was all about AI taking over and things. So that story, that science fiction concept has been around for a long time. It's just interesting that it's now actually bearing some real fruit. But this is when the Vision goes a little bit, a little bit AI and wants to take over things. We haven't finished the story by the end of 250, but I also want to mention out that this is the first reference to West Coast Avengers, when Vision suggests that Hawkeye start up a team out on the West Coast. We haven't gotten into the grand tie-ins yet, but this one here, Demon Storm, has involves the cask of Ancient Winters or Endless Winter from Thor. And in fact, if you read this issue here, 249, if you want to find out the ending of this, you have to read Thor 350. So it again trying to tie in all of the universe. And then we have a final, which is a double-sized issue number 250 against character Maelstrom. It unites the East and West Coast Avengers to handle this threat. Okay, so overall, what do I think of this? And is it a recommended read? Well, I liked the Jim Shooter, Hank Pym storyline. It'd be nice if that was collected in a trade paperback, just the issues that were concerned with that, because there's a lot of filler all around it that I'm not even interested in. Some of it I really don't like at all. As far as the Roger Stern, it's good because of the characterizations and the development. I mean, there are subplots that carry over from one issue to the next. You get subplot here, a couple of subplots over here, and then we move in the next issue, and those are continued. Maybe another one is added, maybe one's expanded upon, maybe one comes to a conclusion, but there's that going throughout the entire run is pretty good. And he does do the Vision as an AI type of overlord type of story developing, which is kind of interesting. But overall, for the Roger Stern stuff, it's just okay. If somebody said, can you recommend to me a run of the Avengers? I would not pick this run. It's just kind of flat. I don't find that the threats are all that compelling, and I find that the results and the way that they're handled are fairly standard. I just didn't find it all that exciting or engaging. It's an all right read, but I'm unlikely to read it again. And I've already talked about all the books that I consider to be, spec books or investment books. And as I say, there are a ton of characters throughout this 50-issue run for those that collect. And there's a couple of artists there with George Perez and Gene Colan, and that one cover by Ed Hannigan with the Hawkeye and Ant-Man. That's probably got some collector value to it as well. That's what I've got to say about this block of the Avengers. Thanks for sticking around. If you stuck around, it's a long video. These things end up being so long. Anyways, be good to yourself, be good to others, and we'll talk again soon.